By age 50, the average American man carries about 1.5 pounds of fat wrapped around his liver, pancreas, and heart. Women aren't far behind. This isn't the fat you can pinch. This is the fat that's quietly rewriting your metabolism, and almost no scale will ever show it to you. I'm Sophia Hart, and this is the Longevity Table. Here's what almost no one tells you. The body stores fat in two completely different ways, and the two tissues behave like two completely different organs. One is the soft layer right under your skin, the part you can grab between your fingers. That layer is upholstery. It cushions you. It insulates you. It is not the problem. And then there's the other kind. The kind that wraps itself around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, your heart. The kind that hides behind your abdominal wall, where no mirror and no measuring tape will ever find it. The scientific name for that hidden layer is visceral fat. The fat that wraps your organs, not the kind you can squeeze. And it is not upholstery. It is a chemical factory. After 40, in most American adults, that factory starts running shifts you never asked for, pumping signals into your bloodstream every minute of every day. You know the picture. You are not heavy on paper. You've gained 10 or 15 pounds since your 30s, almost all of it around the middle. Your waist is 2 inches thicker than it was a decade ago, and somehow your arms and legs look exactly the same. Your blood pressure has crept up 2 ticks at every annual visit. Your fasting glucose is borderline. Your triglycerides are a little high. Your doctor shrugs and says, "It's age. Try to lose a few pounds." And you've tried. So many times you've stopped counting. If you watched the last video on this channel, you already know one piece of why that's been so hard. The body runs a defense system that fights weight loss after 40. Your metabolism quietly downshifts and refuses to come back up. That's the part the scale shows you. This is the part it doesn't show you. While that defense system is running on the outside, this internal tissue is doing something arguably more dangerous on the inside. It isn't just sitting there. It is talking to your liver, your pancreas, your blood vessels, and what it is saying in chemical terms is the opposite of what your body needs to hear. This is also why 2 people can weigh exactly the same and face completely different futures. One might run for another 30 years. The other might be 5 years out from a cardiac event and not know it. The scale will not tell you which one is which. So here is where we go. What this hidden tissue actually is, biologically, what it pumps into your blood, what it does to the hormone that controls your blood sugar. One industrial chemical category in your environment that quietly makes the problem worse, and where it hides. And then the part nobody has told you straight, what actually shrinks it. Not the cardio you've been doing, not the salads, the specific things real research has shown move the needle. Stick with me, because in the middle of this video, I'm going to give you the name of one specific marker on a routine blood panel that quietly tracks this hidden tissue years before your waistline gives it away. Almost no general practitioner orders it on autopilot. It costs around $20. You can ask for it by name. And once you know that number, you have something the bathroom scale will never give you, a real signal of what's happening on the inside. But before any of that, we have to answer the question you might be sitting with right now. What makes this fat so different? Why does the layer under your skin behave like padding, and the layer around your organs behave like a factory running shifts you never authorized? That's where we go next. So what makes this hidden tissue so biologically different? Start with anatomy. The fat under your skin sits where you can grab it. When it releases fatty acids, they drift into your general circulation, get diluted in your bloodstream, and the liver sees a manageable dose. That's how a healthy storage system is supposed to work. The fat tucked between and around your organs drains differently. Anatomically, it sits on a direct express lane to your liver. The blood vessels leaving that inner compartment dump straight into the portal vein, the highway that runs into your liver before anything else. So when that tissue releases fatty acids and chemical signals, the liver gets hit first, hard, and at full concentration. Your liver is essentially marinating in whatever that compartment decides to send. A researcher named Jean-Pierre Després at Université Laval in Quebec City has been documenting this distinction since the late 1980s. In a 2012 review in Circulation, the Journal of the American Heart Association, he pulled together more than 3 decades of imaging studies and long-term follow-up trials to argue that the deep belly store, not total body fat, is what actually drives cardiovascular risk. His colleague, Andrei Chernoff, co-authored a 40-page review in Physiological Reviews in 2013 that became the field's standard map of how this tissue works. Together, they showed something the rest of medicine took a long time to absorb. 2 pounds of the soft surface layer and 2 pounds of the deeper layer are not the same biological object. They look identical on a scale. They behave like opposite organs. The inner layer is more alive. Its cells are larger, more active, more responsive to stress hormones, and more willing to release their contents back into circulation. Per gram, it carries more receptors, more inflammatory traffic, more signaling activity. The surface layer is, more or less, a parking lot. The inner one is a working factory with the lights on 24 hours a day. That is the part nobody told you. This tissue isn't passive storage. It's a gland. It releases dozens of chemical messengers into your bloodstream every minute, some that drive low-grade inflammation, some that interfere with appetite control in the brain, some that change how your liver handles sugar and fat. The technical name for the state where your cells stop responding properly to the hormone that controls your blood sugar is insulin resistance, and the inner fat layer is one of the most powerful drivers of it in the body. Here is how that mechanism actually runs. Fatty acids and inflammatory signals pour into the liver through that portal highway. The liver, soaked in that input, starts to ignore insulin's instructions. Normally, insulin tells the liver to stop pouring sugar into the blood between meals. With that signal blunted, the liver keeps pouring sugar out anyway. Your fasting glucose creeps up 2 points a year. Your pancreas, sensing the high sugar, releases more insulin. More insulin tells the body to store more fat, preferentially in the same inner compartment that started the problem. The cycle compounds. Year by year, your numbers drift in the same direction, and your doctor says, borderline, until the day they don't. That is why your fasting glucose is borderline. That is why the triglycerides are a little high. That is why the blood pressure crept up. Those numbers aren't random aging. They are the readout of one inner compartment talking to your liver in a language your body was not built to hear at this volume. And here's where it gets stranger, and where most people get blindsided. The chemical signals coming out of that compartment don't just talk to your liver, they talk to your immune system, they talk to your blood vessels, and, in a way that has surprised even the researchers studying it, they talk to your brain. That's where we go next. The signals coming out of this hidden tissue don't stop at the liver. They cross into other systems entirely, and the most disorienting place they end up is in your head. Your fat tissue is supposed to talk to your brain. That's a normal feature of healthy biology. When you have enough stored energy, fat cells release a chemical signal that travels through the bloodstream and tells your brain, "We have plenty in the tank. You don't need to keep hunting for food." That is the body's natural off switch for appetite, and the more storage you carry, the more of that signal goes out. Here's the catch. In someone carrying a lot of the deep belly layer and the constant background inflammation that layer produces, the brain's receivers for that signal get jammed. The signal still goes out, at higher and higher volume year after year, but the part of the brain that's supposed to read it stops responding cleanly. Multiple labs have documented this over the past 2 decades. The pattern is consistent. The more of the deep store you carry, the worse the brain's reception gets. The result is exactly what you have probably lived. The fat is shouting, "We have enough, you can stop." The brain is hearing static. So the appetite stays on. The cravings stay on. The reach for the second helping stays on. You are not weak. Your wiring has been jammed by a tissue that is supposed to be regulating this and is doing the opposite. That is part of why dieting after 40 feels like fighting your own head. Biochemically, you are. The same inflammation that jams the brain hits the blood vessel walls. It stiffens them. It contributes to the slow climb in blood pressure. It accelerates the quiet buildup of plaque you'll never see until something narrows enough to matter. The chemical traffic coming off this tissue is one of the reasons cardiovascular risk compounds in the background for 10 or 15 years before any stress test catches anything. It doesn't stop there. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic, Tamar Ticonia, James Kirkland, and their team laid out the case in a 2010 paper in Aging Cell titled Fat Tissue, Aging, and Cellular Senescence. The aged, deep belly store, they showed, is one of the most powerful sources of the chronic immune activation that accelerates aging across the entire body. By the time they published a follow-up in JAMA in 2018, the field had a name for it and a growing list of consequences. In their work, this tissue is not just a metabolic problem. It is one of the engines of how you age. Now layer on something that affects roughly half of you watching. If you are a woman in your 40s or 50s, something specific has been happening to where your body chooses to store fat. Before menopause, the female body preferentially stores fat in the hips, thighs, and rear, the so-called pear pattern. Estrogen is the director of that decision. It quite literally tells the body where to deposit. As estrogen begins to decline, somewhere in the late 30s for some women and the mid-40s for most, that instruction reverses. A study published in 2008 in the International Journal of Obesity, led by Joan Lovejoy at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, followed 156 women across the menopausal transition for an average of just over 4 years. What the data showed? The deep belly store grew significantly more in women who passed through menopause during the study than in those who didn't. And that growth was largely independent of whether the woman's overall weight changed at all. In plain English, the scale might say nothing has changed. The mirror says the waistline is thicker. The doctor says, your weight looks fine. Your biology has been quietly redirected to store the most dangerous kind of fat in the most dangerous location by a hormonal shift you did not authorize. For men, the same story runs slower. Testosterone declines about 1% a year after 30, and that gradual loss nudges storage toward the same deep compartment over time. It is not the cliff women face. It is a slow slope across decades. So here is what we have built so far. You have a tissue that talks to your liver, your brain, your blood vessels, and your immune system in chemical signals your body cannot mute. After 40, in most American adults, that traffic gets louder. After menopause, in most women, the volume jumps by another order of magnitude. Which brings us to the question I promised you at the start. 2 people, exactly the same weight, exactly the same body mass index. One walks out of his physical with a clean bill of health. The other, identical numbers on paper, is 5 years from a cardiac event. What actually separates them? That is where we go next. 2 people, same weight, same body mass index, completely different futures. Here is the mechanism. Picture 2 men, both 5'10", both 175 pounds. Both walk through their annual physical with a body mass index of 25.1. Technically, slightly overweight by the chart, but well within the range most American men live in. Now put them both through a CT scan that measures where the fat actually is. The first man's body is storing his extra weight mostly under the skin, across the back, the chest, the thighs. The second man's body is storing nearly all of his extra weight inside the abdominal cavity, packed around his organs. Same scale, same chart. The second man is carrying roughly 3 times the amount of the dangerous compartment. Statistically, his risk of a heart attack in the next decade is several times higher. His doctor is looking at the same chart and seeing the same patient. The biology does not care about the chart. A research team at Imperial College London, led by Jimmy Bell with Louise Thomas, spent years running MRI body composition scans on people who looked healthy by every visible measure. Normal weight, normal frame, fit-looking. In a 2012 paper in Nutrition Research Reviews titled Excess Body Fat in Obese and Normal Weight Subjects, they laid out what their imaging had been quietly showing. A meaningful fraction of these apparently lean people were carrying enormous amounts of the deep store, hidden behind a perfectly average waistline. They gave this pattern a name that has stuck: thin outside, fat inside. People who pass every visual test, every standard weigh-in, every clothes fit assessment, and whose internal picture looks like someone 40 pounds heavier. The mirror image of this is just as strange. A subset of heavier people, people who would never be called slim, carry the bulk of their weight in the surface upholstery, with relatively little inner storage. Their blood work runs clean. Their risk of heart disease in long-term follow-up studies is dramatically lower than the thin outside, fat inside group. The chart puts these 2 groups in opposite categories. The The biology puts them in opposite categories from the chart. This is the part the medical system has been slow to absorb. The number on the scale, the index on the chart, even the way your body looks in the mirror, none of those instruments can tell you where the fat is. They can only tell you how much there is in total. And how much is the wrong question. Where is the question that actually predicts your next decade. So if your doctor has told you your weight looks fine for the last 10 years, while your blood pressure crept up, your morning blood sugar drifted toward the high end, and your waist quietly thickened, the instrument was wrong. Not malicious, just blind to the layer that mattered. The good news is that there is a way to see what the scale can't. A specific marker on a routine blood panel that tracks the inner store with remarkable accuracy. It is cheap, it is fast. Most general physicians don't order it on autopilot, but you can ask for it by name and they will run it. We're getting to it in just a minute. Before we do, if you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I publish a new piece every week, each on a different reason the body does what it does after 40. All right, the marker. What it is, what it costs, and why almost no one is told to test for it routinely. That's where we go next. The marker is fasting insulin. 2 words, 1 blood draw. It is one of the most predictive metabolic numbers your body produces, and almost no general physician orders it on a routine panel. Here is why it matters. Recall the cycle we mapped earlier. The deep store talks to the liver stops listening to insulin, the pancreas compensates by pumping out more. The single number that captures all of that, at the earliest possible moment, is the amount of insulin floating in your blood after an overnight fast. The amount your pancreas has to release to keep your blood sugar in the normal range climbs steadily for 10 to 15 years before your blood sugar ever drifts. This is the part almost nobody is told. Your fasting blood sugar is a late signal. Your fasting insulin is an early one. By the time your fasting blood sugar reads borderline or pre-diabetic, your pancreas has likely been pulling double or triple shifts for the better part of a decade. The dysfunction wasn't sudden. It was visible the whole time, just on a number nobody was looking at. A pathologist named Joseph Kraft, who spent the back half of his career at St. Joseph Hospital in Chicago, ran more than 14,000 oral glucose tolerance tests with insulin measurements between the 1970s and the early 2000s. What he documented across that cohort was simple and damning. Roughly 3 out of 4 adults with apparently normal glucose readings already had grossly abnormal insulin patterns. Diabetes, in his data, was visible on the insulin curve a decade or more before it was visible on the glucose curve. He spent the second half of his career trying to convince the rest of medicine that the standard glucose-only screen was missing most of the disease. His point, in plain English, by the time your doctor catches your blood sugar climbing, your body has been signaling, "We are in trouble," for years, on a channel no one tuned into. The cost of adding this test to your next blood draw is somewhere between $20 and $30 in most American labs. Most insurance plans cover it if your physician writes it on the order. If they don't write it, you can ask. The phrase to use is short and specific. I would like to add a fasting insulin to this panel. That's it. No protocol to memorize, no certificate to bring. The test runs on the same blood that gets drawn for everything else. What does it tell you? Broadly, in research literature, a fasting insulin in the low single digits is what healthy looks like in adults. Numbers drifting into the high teens or above are where the cycle we described is already deep in motion. The exact reference ranges vary by lab. The trend over time matters more than any single reading. If yours comes back elevated, that is not a diagnosis and it is not a panic moment. It is a real signal, the kind your scale will never give you, and it is the start of a real conversation with your doctor. So that is the marker, a single number on a routine blood draw that tracks the deep belly store with more accuracy than any tape measure, any scale, any chart in the exam room. The information has been sitting there for 50 years. Your body has been writing it down every morning before breakfast. Almost no one is told to look. We have answered the question I planted at the start of this video. Now the next one, and it is the one almost nobody sees coming. There is a category of industrial compounds sitting in objects in your house, on your skin, on the receipts in your wallet, and very likely in your bloodstream right now, that quietly worsens the exact storage problem we have been describing. It is not a conspiracy. It is peer-reviewed, and once you know where it hides, you can lower the exposure starting tomorrow. That is where we go next. Here is the part of the story that almost nobody connects to weight. Inside your body, there are receptors built to receive your own hormones, tiny molecular locks. Each one is tuned to a specific key: estrogen, testosterone, thyroid, insulin. When the right hormone arrives, the lock turns, and a specific instruction gets delivered to the cell. That is how your endocrine system runs. Now imagine a category of industrial compounds engineered for completely different purposes: to make plastic flexible, to line a food can, to keep printer ink from smudging on a cash register receipt, that happen to fit those same locks. Not perfectly, not the way the original key does, but close enough to turn the mechanism, sometimes in the wrong direction, sometimes at the wrong time. The technical name for these compounds is endocrine disruptors, industrial chemicals that mimic your own hormones and scramble their signals. And there is a peer-reviewed body of research now, growing steadily for 2 decades, showing that several of them push fat storage toward exactly the compartment we have been describing. The most studied of them is bisphenol A, BPA for short. It is the compound that for decades made hard plastics rigid and lined the inside of most food and beverage cans in the American supply. In 2008, a paper landed in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, led by Ian Lang and David Melzer at Peninsula Medical School in the United Kingdom, working with data on roughly 1,500 American adults pulled from the federal NHANES Health Survey. What they found, after adjusting for age, sex, income, smoking, and body weight, was striking. Higher levels of BPA in urine tracked with significantly higher rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and abnormal liver enzyme readings. The signal was not subtle. It survived the controls. The mechanism has been worked out in detail since, in large part by Frederick Vomsaal at the University of Missouri and a series of labs that followed him. BPA, at concentrations within the range American adults actually carry, activates a specific receptor inside fat cells that functions as a master switch for fat cell growth and multiplication. In plain English, this chemical tells your body to make more fat cells, and to make those cells more receptive to storage. Animal studies show the effect pushes the storage preferentially toward the inner compartment we have been mapping all video. Where does this stuff actually hide? Not everywhere. Specific places. The thermal paper used in cash register receipts is one of the densest sources. Every time you handle a receipt, especially with damp or just moisturized hands, a measurable dose absorbs through the skin within minutes. The lining of most metal food cans is another, which is why canned soups, canned vegetables, and canned beans show up consistently in exposure data. Hard plastic containers that have been heated, microwaved, run through a dishwasher, left closed in a hot car, release substantially more than cold ones. Polycarbonate water bottles in older designs were a third major source, though many manufacturers have shifted away over the past decade. A related family of compounds, phthalates, sits in soft plastics, vinyl shower curtains, vinyl flooring, and most synthetic fragrances added to personal care products, laundry detergents, and air fresheners. Leonardo Tresande and his team at NYU School of Medicine in New York have published a series of papers, including a 2020 review in the Lancet's Diabetes and Endocrinology journal, linking phthalate exposure to higher body fat, particularly in adult women. Now the calibration, because this is the part most coverage gets wrong. This is one variable among several. Genetics, sleep, movement, what's on your plate, and the hormonal shifts of midlife all matter more in absolute terms. Lowering this exposure will not undo the cycle on its own, but it is one of the few inputs that is genuinely controllable, and the controls are not difficult. Glass and stainless steel containers for any food that gets heated. Decline the printed receipt when the option exists. Buy fresh or frozen rather than canned where it's reasonable. Look for fragrance-free on personal care products. None of this requires throwing out your kitchen. It just means stopping the slow drip. So you have the marker that tracks the inner tissue. You have a hidden exposure that quietly worsens it. Now we get to the question you came here for. What actually shrinks this fat? Cardio? Diet? Something else entirely? Because the answer the research keeps landing on is not the answer most American adults have been chasing for the last 30 years. That is where we go next. The answer is resistance training. Not running, not cycling, not the elliptical, not the cardio that has dominated American gym culture for the last 40 years. The single most consistently studied intervention for shrinking the inner tissue, across more than 100 trials in adults across the age range you fall into, is lifting things heavy enough that your muscles have to adapt. That is not what most of us were told. Most of us were told to do more cardio, eat less, move more. And cardio is not useless. It has its own real benefits for the heart, the brain, endurance, mood. But for shrinking the specific compartment we have been mapping all video, the meta-analyses keep coming back to the same finding. Resistance training is at least as effective, and on several specific markers, more effective than cardio alone. In 2012, a research group led by Inez Ismail at the University of Sydney in Australia published a systematic review in Obesity Reviews, one of the top journals in the field, pooling data from more than 30 randomized trials covering thousands of adults. What they found? Aerobic exercise reduced the inner compartment significantly. Resistance training reduced it about the same amount. The combination worked best of all. The strongest predictor of success was not which type of exercise. It was the total amount of muscle being recruited, hard enough, often enough. So if you have been on the treadmill for 20 years wondering why the waist will not move, this is part of the answer. You have been training the wrong tissue. Here is the mechanism, in plain English. Your muscles are the largest glucose sink in your body. Every time you eat carbohydrates, the sugar in your blood has to go somewhere. The biggest, most willing destination, when it is available, is muscle tissue. The more muscle you have, the more of that sugar gets pulled out of circulation and stored where it belongs. The less muscle you have, the more of that sugar stays in your bloodstream, telling your pancreas to keep pumping out the hormone we covered earlier, telling your body to keep depositing storage in the inner compartment. Muscle and the deep store are biological antagonists. Build the first, and the second has less reason to expand. This is where age becomes the silent variable. After roughly 35, an adult who does not actively strength train loses about 1% of their muscle mass per year. By 60, that's a quarter of the lean tissue you used to have. By 70, half. And every pound of muscle that walks away is a pound of glucose disposal capacity walking away with it. The trial data is clear. This drift is largely reversible at any age if the training is real. Real in this context means specific. The research keeps pointing to the same elements. Multiple muscle groups worked through their full range, loads heavy enough that the last few repetitions are genuinely hard, 2 to 3 sessions a week with adequate recovery between them. The exact program matters less than the principle. Your muscles need a reason to adapt, and the reason has to be greater than what they encountered yesterday. The partner to all of this is protein. When you train, you are sending your body the signal to rebuild muscle tissue, and that rebuild requires raw material. Stuart Phillips and his colleagues at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, have spent more than 2 decades studying this question. Their work, including a 2016 paper led by Thomas Longland in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, shows that adults eating substantially more protein than the older American guideline while training hold on to significantly more muscle than adults eating the lower recommended amounts. The exact target depends on age, body size, and activity. For most adults in the range we are talking about, the takeaway is simpler than the math. Treat protein as the centerpiece of every meal, not the afterthought. You do not have to obsess over grams. The signal from the research is plain. Eat real protein at every meal. Train your muscles hard enough that they have to grow back stronger. The body will start moving the storage out of the wrong compartment on its own. And there are still 2 more pieces of the protocol, both quieter, both essential. One you do every night without thinking about it. One you do at the dinner table without realizing it counts. That is where we go next. The first quiet piece is sleep. Not how much you slept Saturday morning, not the 7 hours your tracker said you got last Tuesday. Your sleep, averaged across a typical week. Because the inner belly compartment we have spent this video mapping has a relationship with sleep that almost no one is told about. In 2022, a team led by Naima Kovasan at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, published one of the cleanest experiments ever done on this question in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, one of cardiology's top journals. They took healthy adults, brought them into a sleep laboratory, and ran them through 2 weeks of restricted sleep, about 4 hours a night, the kind of stretch many American adults run during a busy season at work. They controlled the food, they controlled the schedule. 2 weeks, not 2 years. The result? The inner belly store grew by roughly 11% in 2 weeks in healthy adults, with no meaningful change in their weight on the scale. The fat moved inward. Why? Sleep is when your storage and appetite hormones reset overnight. Cut sleep short, and the morning starts with elevated stress hormones, the fullness signal we mapped earlier suppressed, and the opposing hunger signal turned up loud. The body, sensing low-grade emergency, preferentially deposits energy in the inner compartment. 2 weeks of short sleep, and the shift is already measurable on a scan. Years of it, and you can fill in the rest. This is part of why the people you know who pulled night shifts in their 30s and 40s tend to carry a thicker midsection by their 50s, at the same weight as everyone else. The clock matters. Most adults need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. The exact number is individual. What is not individual is that chronically undersleeping the body's needs is a slow, daily transfer of mass from where it belongs to where it does not. The second quiet piece is fiber, specifically the soluble kind, the type that dissolves in water and forms a gel as it moves through your digestive tract. Beans, lentils, oats, apples, the skin of root vegetables. Most of the foods our great-grandparents ate without thinking, and most American adults now go days without. In 2012, a research team led by Kristen Hairston at Wake Forest School of Medicine in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, published a paper in the journal Obesity, tracking adults across a 5-year window. What they found? Every additional 10 grams of soluble fiber added to the daily diet, roughly what's in 2 servings of beans or a bowl of oats plus an apple, was associated with about a 4% reduction in how fast the inner compartment was accumulating. 5 years of data. Real food, real difference. The mechanism runs in 2 directions. Soluble fiber slows the rate at which sugar from your meal enters your bloodstream. A smaller spike, less of the storage hormone, less deposition where you don't want it. And the same fiber feeds the bacteria in your gut, which in turn produce specific compounds that quiet the background inflammation we have been tracing all video. 1 input, 2 pathways, both pulling in the same direction. So here is the whole picture pulled into one frame. The fat that matters most lives behind your abdominal wall. It is not what the scale measures and not what the mirror shows. It is what runs the metabolic damage, the cardiovascular risk, the inflammation, the appetite confusion, the slow drift of every number on your annual physical. After 40, it grows for hormonal reasons largely independent of what the scale says. Endocrine-disrupting compounds in everyday objects quietly nudge it bigger. You can track it cheaply with a fasting insulin test most physicians do not order until asked, and it shrinks with real consistency in response to 4 levers: resistance training, adequate protein, adequate sleep, and soluble fiber. Not exotic, not expensive, not pharmaceutical. 4 ordinary inputs the published literature keeps coming back to. If your doctor has never had time to walk you through any of this, that is not their failure. 15 minutes does not cover the deep biology of being 40 in America. That is the gap this channel is built for. If you've been looking for this kind of breakdown, the actual studies, the names behind them, the mechanisms instead of the buzzwords, subscribe. I publish a new piece every week, each one a different reason the body does what it does after 40. There's one coming on the specific blood markers worth tracking, and another on what your metabolism is actually doing while you sleep, both pieces of what we built today. Drop a comment with the question you want me to cover next. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.